Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CCC Talks with Mark O'Loughlin and the Cloud Credential Council. Now, today we're joined by David Jones, who is CEO and founder of Instinctive Solutions, where David is defining a new way of delivering marketing excellence for emerging technology vendors. And David, you're also chairman of the board of directors of AIIM International, which is a leading association for intelligent information management, providing education, market research, best practices, ultimately to help organizations find, control, and optimize their information. David, thank you for joining us on CCC Talk. So listen, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Mark, well, thank you for inviting me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I've spent the last 20 years or so building, selling, and more recently marketing what are called information management software solutions. So all of the things, all of the tools that we've now become used to using in the new remote working world. But about 12 months ago, I flipped the narrative a little bit, and instead of working for the vendors within that space, I actually started my own company. So now I run an organization called Instinctive Solutions. And what we do is we specifically help emerging technology vendors to figure out how to talk to end users.
Yes.
Technology vendors are very, very good at talking about bells and whistles, about functions and features, right? What we help them do is try and empathize and understand their customers a little bit more. And turn that into an effective go-to-market strategy.
That's a good corner of the market, I think, that you've looked at, because as you said, we'll get into that in a moment of a difficult, well, or easy question, depends, easy for you in a moment. But yeah, as you said, technology companies are very good at the technology. They're very good at the products and features. They're very good at the design process now and all the agility thrown into it. But when it comes to, I guess, getting a customer, they're probably a bit too fixated on trying to sell to the customer, maybe as opposed to helping have a conversation with the customer about what that product will do for the customer. Is that what you saw? Is that what you're helping them with?
Yeah, I think vendors are in a difficult position, right? Vendors have to differentiate themselves from other vendors. They have to be seen in a positive light. And one of the ways that they do that is to constantly innovate, to constantly bring out new features, new functions.
Yeah.
The challenge is, and certainly the challenge that I've seen within the information management space, is that those functions and features that the vendors are bringing out are possibly getting further and further away from what the end users actually want.
Yeah.
Again, in the information management space, AI, robotic process automation, all of the new bells and whistles that are there.
Yes.
And actually, a lot of organizations that you talk to are still trying to digitize their mailroom. They just want to get all of the post that comes in through the door every morning scanned and distributed efficiently. Now, no information management vendor has talked about digital mailroom for about 6 years because it's not sexy and it's not showing them differentiating themselves. But that's what the end users want. And the smart vendors out there are actually starting to realize that and go, well, hang on a minute, let's figure out how we use all of these new bells and whistles to actually solve what might be old problems, but are still problems.
I like that. The thought that we're solving old problems, I constantly see us trying to solve new problems and problems that don't exist. And like an IoT came along before there was a problem for IoT, and we're trying to work out, and this is okay because this is one part of the narrative, how IoT solutions might deliver value in the future. And you see this in farming, where you have the farm machine that's hooked up with all these sensors that reads the weather, reads the soil, and does all this intelligent stuff. And they figured that out later on. But equally, we could go back and say, let's solve some of the existing problems and old problems because they don't go away.
Well, there's an interesting dynamic in there, right? So think about AI. AI has been in that situation for the past 50 years or so. AI was created in the 50s, and for up until probably about 5 years ago, it was a technology looking for a solution.
Yes.
I think AI's gone over that hump now and is actually delivering real value. But there are some interesting dynamics, and we talk about solving old problems. And I think if you look at the way that technology has taken us up until recently, we've been getting slightly better. We've been getting incremental improvements in what we've been doing. What we've got now is new technologies that allow us actually to stop doing those incremental step changes and actually just rethink the way that we do things completely.
Yes, yes. I think that's important. We had fantastic guy Piero Scarucci on from the US, and he was talking about, he's been in AI for 40 years. And he says, Bart, nothing surprises me in AI. He says, the stuff today, we were talking about that 40 years ago. We just do it quicker with cloud and different things. But he still says we're still looking for the things to solve with it at the end of the day. And it causes, if you implement it wrong, it causes you more pain as well, or if you don't implement it correctly. And a big thing was just mentioned was, say, chatbots at the moment. So driven by AI, a badly designed chatbot is a surefire way to lose a customer.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, information management, a lot of that is about digitizing manual processes, right? Getting rid of paper and moving to a digital world.
Yes.
There's a funny saying though, and I'll be as polite as I can do with it. If you digitize a rubbish process, what you end up with is a rubbish digital process. You know,
Yeah.
you have to rethink. You can't just take something that's bad, make it digital, and it instantly becomes good. That's not the way that it works.
That's it. And you said earlier on, we have to rethink. I think that's an important thing. Now, David, I'm going to ask you to put your thinking cap on now. You've 20 plus years. You're a veteran in this industry, security, big data, cloud, now the marketing all over it with the technology vendors going it alone. What is digital transformation to David Jones?
Great question. I think the interesting thing is that digital transformation is whatever you want it to be. You go talk to an enterprise,
yep.
And it could be whole-scale new IT solutions across the board that'll take 15 years to implement. You talk to me personally, it's about me using an iPad to take my notes instead of using a pen and paper. And I think that's the beauty of digital transformation. What it is to me is moving from the analog, from the paper-based, from the manual things that, you know, again, if I've got a paper notepad in front of me, no one else can get access to that.
Yeah.
Digital transformation allows me to do the same thing, but in a way that others can get access to it. What that gives us is scalability. It gives us the ability to work remotely. It gives us the ability that if the whole thing burns down, hopefully it's stored somewhere in the cloud. It just allows us to do things a little bit more intelligently than we could do in the past. Simple as that.
And doesn't it require change though? As you said, people are used to the pen and paper, now going into a digital world. That actually requires a bit of change and uncomfort to move away from one system to another, because I think, well, my belief is if you don't have that kind of change and uncomfort, to some degree, it's not really digital transformation. You're just doing what you did yesterday, just slightly different, which is okay, but it's not really transformation. Has to see change. So isn't there an element of there's people change, there's doing change, there's ways of work change, there's culture change? Isn't that all baked into digital transformation, even if it's just going from paper to the iPad or the tablet?
It's absolutely the most important piece of digital transformation. Again, back to document management, when we talked about, you know, converting paper systems into digital systems, probably about 20% of that overall project was about the software. Maybe another 30% of that was about the processes. The remaining 50% was about the people. It always is, and part of that is understanding what the people are doing. You know as well as I do, right? If there's a process that goes from A to B, and you talk to 3 people about it, they'll find ways to go around that and to get to where they want to go to. That's just the nature of humans.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. Digital transformation is more about the people than it is about the software. What the technology does is it enables us to do that transformation. But we have to talk to the people, we have to talk to the staff and the users to find out what they're doing. We don't always have to listen religiously 100% to what they do and don't want us to do. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs, right?
Oh, of course. I love that phrase. You've got to break a few eggs. Yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, you know, as long as you can show them benefit and value, and a reason for doing what you're doing, I think 9 times out of 10, you'll get them on board. And you have to get them on board before you start the whole thing, otherwise the whole thing will fall over.
And in the projects you've been involved in and these digital transformations, do organizations accept that early on, that a large chunk of the effort is the people change? And that also equates to a large chunk of the project budget is going to be, and we don't like spending money down there. We like spending lots of money on the technology and then telling the people, thou shalt change quickly.
Yes and no. Those organizations that have succeeded in digital transformation get it and get it early on. And I think, look, it's difficult, right? You sit there at the start of a project and you try and figure out what you're going to do, and you figure out what the software cost is, you figure out what the professional services cost is, and then there's that intangible of the disruption to the business, the training that you've got to give to the staff, the sort of engagement that you have to do right the way throughout the process, that is incredibly difficult to gauge and incredibly difficult to put a price on. And some people are more keen to get things moving than to do things properly, and they'll skip that phase. And the inevitable will happen. They'll end up building something that takes them 12 months, is not fit for purpose, and they'll have to go back around the loop again. And hopefully at some point they figure out what the problem is.
You're going back again. I'm always reminded when you talk like that about, I guess, the Industrial Revolution, when electricity turned up, and you went from everybody working independently in the cottage industries to now these big factories being built with, and the people that failed back then were the people that tried to get the technology, which was electricity. It's crazy when we think about it now, and then a load of people in just to operate machines, where yesterday they made chairs. That transition didn't happen. Massive disruption in their industry, but they got the technology, but they didn't get the people part, the change part, the process part correct. Those that spent more time and effort, and to some degree it's going to cost, but it's, you know, when you look at it in the scheme of things, it's not a big cost at the end of the day. And took a bit more time, got their product out the door quicker, faster, better, because they knew the technology they were dealing with was different and the people were different, and they couldn't just shoehorn them into this new thing. And I went back and read stories about that from the Industrial Revolution, and there's loads of case studies back then. I think we learn good from history. Now, can I ask you, you spend a lot of time now helping the vendor community, which is really good. As you said, they're really good at what they do, but sometimes maybe it's in that conversation with the customer that they need some help. Do you think, by and large, that the vendor view of digital transformation is accurate as to what people need, or do they tend to kind of make it up a little bit?
I think there's a combination. Again, there are great vendors out there, don't get me wrong.
Of course.
That completely get this. But I think it's interesting. It comes back to what you were just saying about the Industrial Revolution, right? Those people that made the real long-term difference didn't just take new technology and apply it to the old problems in the same way. They rethought the way that factories needed to be laid out. They rethought the uses of electricity. It's exactly the same now. And, you know, think about OCR technologies, when you scan a document and it reads the text. Are we really going to get huge value from going from 99.2% accuracy to 99.3% accuracy? Just to get things read in really quickly to then dump it into another system where, you know, someone from accounts payable then has to rekey it. Think the whole process through. Think about how you not only get the data off of the document, but feed it through so that AP don't even have to look at it. And just rethink the whole process. And the good organizations that are out there get that, and they get that because they're talking to the customers and figuring out, again, not just what tools and techniques they need to build to remain innovative, but which tools and techniques and which applications of those tools and techniques actually make a difference to the end user. And I think that there are great examples of organizations out there that are doing that really, really well.
I think there are, in fairness to the industry now, we've got some really good organizations that are driving that are really talking about what transformation is, and with their hand up to saying, oh, we've got a tool, but you have to do the transformation. Now, with our professional services and consulting, we can help you on that, but you're part of that rather than this kind of sell you the software of the old days. And when we're talking about, you're talking about software and applications, that can be SaaS applications, on-premise, whatever that is, private, public cloud, everything now that's all digital and everything in between. Again, they're just mediums of how you get a service at the end of the day. But I think, yeah, that's important. I think there is a challenge, though, for some organizations out there, regardless of whatever marketing is put out there. Would you agree that it's incumbent on an organization to understand what digital transformation means for them? Is that an important step for them that they might miss?
I think it is. I think it's an important step when you look at any type of software or any type of change that's rolled in. Think about analytics. One of the really trendy, really hyped up IT sectors over the past 5-10 years, really. Same problem, right? You can have all the data in the world, you can have all the analytics in the world, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you end up with that good old thing called analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Sit there and you look at all this stuff and it's wonderful. Look, I found a trend. It's like, well, it's completely useless. I think that's exactly the same with digital transformation.
Yes.
We can roll out technology to do wonderful things, but you need to think about why. And you need to look at what your business needs. And again, map that onto what technology is out there and what it can do. And I think that the difference now, though, and a great thing that the cloud has brought to us and SaaS solutions is the ability to experiment.
Yes.
Right? You don't have to buy into 5 years worth of maintenance contracts to be able to test a video conferencing platform or, maybe a mind mapping tool or something along those lines. You can play with it, you can try it, you can test it with a small group, get it working, prove it, get those internal champions, and then let them sell it throughout the organization. And I think that's a key difference. But again, you have to know, or at least have a strong view of where your strategy needs you to go to decide which of those tools, which of those platforms to invest the time and effort into.
Yeah, that's really good. You've got to experiment, but it's cheap to experiment now in some cases. I know in the early days of cloud, big case study from the likes of GE set up a big, massive cloud organization into IoT and AI, and they were experimenting left, right, and center, but it was uncontrolled experimentation, and they didn't know. It doesn't matter, the answer is, but they just kind of say, well, what will this do? And they consumed a huge budget, and then they just closed it down. If they had a bit more structure, I think, and a bit more targeting to certain sectors, they might have made a bit more success of it. Because they were fine with their fail fast, experiment well. But I think they were just doing it for the sake of doing it, from what it seems. Later on, they went at it another way, which seems to be a bit more successful now. But I think we've got to watch that too. But it is a great time for organizations, as you said. You don't need to go into the build and 5-year contracts. You can get some of this for free. That's a secret, isn't it? Some of it is free from vendors. Try us now and see what you think.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the GE example, again, within the industry that I work in, most of us have heard about SharePoint. And when SharePoint was introduced, it was very much a similar sort of experiment, hey, go create a knowledge site for your team to work on. And it was so easy to do it that everybody did it, but they didn't do one. They did 17 each, and you had this explosion of SharePoint sites that then it actually exacerbated the problem because it was designed to help you know where your content was. But now you had 17 different sites and no one knew what the hell was going on, and it just made the problem worse. So it's about that controlled transformation again. And I think just jumping in quickly, we've got a similar sort of situation now with remote working. The last 18 months, organizations had to get remote working up and running quickly.
Yes.
Now, did they go through all of the procurement, dotting I's, crossing T's that they would have done normally? No, they didn't, because they couldn't. So what we find ourselves in now is almost a retrospective. Let's go back and just check how secure some of our video conferencing and stuff like that. So we're in a really interesting time.
That's interesting, yeah. The flexibility of cloud and digital has allowed us to deal with the pandemic head on, people could not leave homes. It wasn't a case of they didn't want to. Government directive said you are now leaving offices, you are staying at home while we figure this out. So you're quite right. An absolute benefit of all this transformation cloud is we could switch this on quickly. But you're quite right in saying now there should be a retrospective. Let's go back, look at the contracts, the security, the parameters, what we've put in. In Europe, does GDPR come into play with whatever solution you have or not? And actually deal with it now, I guess. While there's a bit of leeway, I would suggest, in the market to, to correct things as we go back to a bit more of a more normal. You also mentioned a part of that is an element of control. Now, I think control isn't a bad word. Some people think it is when you think of agile environments, but you still need to have that level of, whether we call it control or governance or whatever, even if you're in this agile world which we're in. Like the scenario you said, getting remote connectivity is we still need to control it somehow, don't we? And we still need to maintain those parameters and maybe retrospectively go back, which I think is where we need to go. Can I ask, IT departments heavily involved in digital transformations across the world? There is not one IT department that's not doing something related to digital transformation, whether they're doing it or it's been done to them. Okay, but I mean, shouldn't the IT department of any organization be driving digital transformation conversations above and beyond the technology? Shouldn't they be going to the board of directors? Shouldn't they be talking to the C-suite about not the technology, but about the business, the value, the benefits, how we manage costs going forward, even though they're all variable costs? The question is, shouldn't they be doing that? What do you think? And B, are they doing that in your experience, or where's the gaps?
So the first one's the easy one to answer. Yes, they absolutely should be doing that. The second one is a little bit harder, and it's harder because think about what you just said. Shouldn't the IT department be going to the business with solutions to business problems?
Yeah.
You have to find a very almost unicorn-like beast within the business world, that's someone that has got a foot in both the IT camp and the business camp.
Yes.
Someone that understands the technology and what it can be used for, but also has a vested interest in multiple departments within the business. Those people don't exist a lot. They're very unique beasts. They're very expensive to organizations as a result. And they tend to get grabbed by those large enterprises. So if you're a medium-sized business, trying to find someone that's got that is incredibly difficult, which means that your digital transformation, as a result, you get IT talking in a board meeting to board members that have no idea what IT are talking about a lot of the time.
There's no translation between it. Yes.
Exactly, and that's the key word. It's that translator role that you need.
Yeah.
To be able to know what's important.
I see that quite a lot. We see that, and I was surprised initially. And the initial thing I thought about when I saw this years ago was, surely that's the role of the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, or equivalent. We have a Chief Technical Officer. The word technical is in there, so we'll attach that to technical things just for today's. But is that not the role of the CIO to talk to the board, understand the technology, do all the translation, show the value? Or has the role of the CIO to evolve? Do they have to learn this? Do they have to understand digital transformation more so than the traditional IT world that they've come from? Is there a gap there?
Yeah, I think there is a gap there, and I think the C-level roles are changing massively.
Right.
Someone once said to me that CIOs have got so much risk placed on them now in terms of ensuring data breaches don't happen, that hacking doesn't happen, that actually CIO stands for career is over if you get it wrong. Right?
We have heard that here. Yes.
Exactly. So, and what that gives you is a very, very distorted view of the world, right? So I'm a big fan of every decision that you make has a risk and a reward balance. Yeah. And if CIOs have got such a heavy prevalence for mitigating risk, then they're going to be very, very reluctant to take a gamble. Interestingly, we've done a lot of work with CFOs recently.
Right.
And the CFO was always thought of as the guy that just held the purse strings.
Yes, yes,
CFOs increasingly are becoming business advisors to the
yes,
enterprise and looking at technology because they use technology extensively
yes,
and looking at how technology can be used. And they're the ones that are driving digital transformation projects from our experience, not CIOs. CIOs are doing it, but the
yes.
CFOs are the ones that are pushing it through.
Isn't that's an interesting change? I have come across that, yes, where in the past the CFOs, the financial officers, were the custodians of the purse strings, manage spend. Now they still are, but the more savvy ones that understand technology understand there's a value in this. So
Sure.
I'm okay spending X and Y and going to the board and asking for that because they're under pressure from the board to return earnings per share, revenue, to show profit, all these other indicators that the CEO cares about. CEO doesn't necessarily care about digital disruption because it costs them money or her money, but they do care about the short, medium, and long term, well, short and medium term, let's say, viability of the organization and the impact of market forces. So if they do have to do this, they want to make sure that the spend is wise and it's correct and it's on the right things. And I think I've seen some of these savvy finance folks even come and say, we got to spend on people. We got to spend on education. We've got to spend on process change and all this other stuff and defending that in the board. And then it's here's CIO, here's the plan, you know. Now, does it, I've always wondered then, we've enough C-suite people, I think, but we can always create another one, you know. Do you see this chief, I guess, digital officer coming up the ranks to take on this role of where the CIO has to be all encompassing and looking at risk, where the chief digital officer is probably in for a couple of years driving digital transformation and then will move into a different role, leave the company or do something else. Is that something that's appearing?
Yeah, I think so. Whether they're called chief digital officers or chief transformation officers, just to mix the acronyms up, or chief strategy officers or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing an increased number of those roles. The challenge with that is that I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? Those people are given 2 years to do the transformation. For me, digital transformation isn't a project, it's a process. It's something that needs to keep going. You can't just say, hey, we've stopped transforming. Hey, we've done it. You've got to keep going, right? So you can't hire someone for 2 years and say, right, at the end of that 2 years, come hell or high water, you're done. It's a shift in mentality. What I am seeing, though, is that those roles and the people in those roles are very, very savvy business people. So they're at least trying to educate the rest of the C-suite to say exactly what I just said.
Yeah, so that's interesting. It's interesting because I've seen a lot of these digital officers or transition or strategic officers, but when I talk to them, a lot of them are saying I'm in a 2-3 year project, and they talk about that project. And I'm sure transformation is not a project; it's a bit more than that. But the scope of what they're in. So on one hand, it's good to put them in a scope, but on another hand, it's probably not so good where they need the full scope of a CIO. Maybe then we'll get, I don't know, it'll be challenging for who's the leader in that case, you know, or is it a dual tandem role? And then organizations looking at the cost and saying, oh, we'll absorb this for 3 years and no more. But as you said, it's like we're talking about electricity early on. It's just because you've got the electricity in doesn't mean for the next 2, 3, 4 years you know what to do with it. And the one machine that you plugged into it is not the only machine you're going to use or the only light system or the only thing you're going to use off it. You're going to have to keep innovating because your competitor has just done what you've done. And now they're plugging something else in. And it's not the world we're in at the moment where you put something new in with digital you do something different, you change a process. If you're in an industry, your competitor is going to see what you've done and just do the same. So if you stand still, you're losing market share there. Isn't that where we are?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think that you beautifully highlighted the challenge that people have got, right? There's parallel streams of activity that need to be going on. You need to have that continual improvement, that continual transformation, which needs to be very carefully scoped.
Yes.
That's possibly what you should be showing to your competitors so that they think you're traveling just down that road there. But in parallel, in secret, what you're doing is you're actually rethinking the whole thing. and
That's
building something that takes you leaps and bounds ahead of anybody else. The challenge is resourcing both of those at the same time.
yes, yes, yes. And what you said there, rethinking the whole thing, rethinking, I think, is what digital transformation is all about. Rethinking. If there's anything our listeners take away today, I think that's a key thing to think about, you know. So tell us, not everybody is doing digital transformation so far. There are still companies out there that may not be or have just started. In your experience, what were some of the telltale symptoms that people needed to start digital transformation? Some of those
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to argue with you a little bit. I think everyone has had to do some digital transformation in the
things.
past
Sure,
18
sure.
months, whether they wanted to. I think it's interesting. Those that were prepared for digital
Yeah,
transformation at least had an idea of what was coming, transitioned a lot better than
yeah,
those who didn't, right?
yes,
For me, the interesting thing, one of the telltale signs now is going to be when people go back to work. Because if you think about it, the move to remote working was actually relatively easy. You know, give
yes,
someone a laptop, give them a VPN connection at the simplest level, and they're in. Well,
yes,
we've now got something called hybrid working that's coming back, right? That means that actually they're not just working from home. So remote working, a lot of people literally picked up all the paperwork from the office, picked up the pot plant and the laptop,
yes,
and moved
yes,
it to their home office. Well,
yes.
now they're going to be doing 2 days a week at home, 2 days a week in the office, and traveling in and out. That's where digital transformation is really going to come to play, about securing content in this fluid
Yes.
environment. And I think, the telltale signs are those organizations that understand that have proactively been thinking about that over the last 12 months and have prepared for that.
Yes.
Those that haven't are going to be, again, in complete pandemonium.
I think, and as you said, it was easy because of the technology to adopt remote capabilities, whatever platform people used. You just got it, plugged it in, made it a bit secure, switched it on. But wasn't the first challenge, first of all, people sitting there now trying to communicate, a team of 20 on a remote call. First of all, how do you speak? How do you talk? So there's all that, and that's all the people stuff. That's the skills we need. And then in some people figuring out, how do I manage my day? So isn't that all that? But what we've done for those successful companies, or for the people that have struggled through this but managed to get it working, that is change. That's a massive amount of change to how people work, whether they knew it or not, and they've gone through it. And that's what it's about. That's when the transformation happens, with a digital technology enabling it. Isn't that the story?
I think you've nailed it
Yeah.
exactly. And we talked earlier about technology being about 20% of any transformation project.
Yeah.
So that bit was easy. But now we're 18 months or whatever it is into this,
Yeah.
and the strain's starting to show, right? People are
Yeah.
getting further and further behind. People are working longer and longer hours. There's no work-life balance now. So it's all of those social and interpersonal and personal skills
Yes.
that I don't think many organizations are ready for.
Mm.
Again, it's understanding. I think it was Nike that gave everybody a week off last week globally,
Yes. I saw that.
because they needed people to regenerate and take some time off. And I think it's just understanding of that you can't just work people harder, and especially for organizations that are multinational. You know,
Yes.
someone on the west coast of the US just saying at 3 p.m. their time, I need to talk to the UK sales guy. That's not really fair on anybody.
Yes.
But it's understanding what those balances are.
It is.
And it's interesting as well. Sorry, you think about the millennials coming into this. They used to being on digitally all the time on their personal stuff, but they're now bringing that into the workplace, and that's a good thing in many ways. But equally, it's a bad thing. I think we need to be very careful over the coming years to manage
there
this care.
there is a bit of a divide, because, as you said, what they're doing outside of work is not work, so it's not pressurized. And now they're going to be switched on. But it goes back to a point you made there, David, that it's about continual change. So people got to grips with using remote technologies and then working out their day. But now we're going, as you said, into this hybrid mode where it's 2 days in the office, 2 days out of the office, one day, who knows? And even that's a shift now because it's just, and as you said, we've got to continually change now. The technology is moving so fast. What we're doing, we don't just change once. It's not a single project. It's just, this is business, and this is just, it's, what do you call it? More digital transformation, or what do you call it? Business change. It's just same thing nearly. It's just, but we're getting more and more of it.
I think this is life now, Mark. That's the challenge.
It's life and business life.
Change faster and faster and faster. We're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, and that's interesting how it's gonna pan out now. The digital transformations, Forbes have they put this out a couple of years ago. 70% of digital transformations fail. Now that's come from probably in 10 years before, 70% of projects failed. So they're just seeing a mirror on that. In your experience, do you think that's true, or is there a problem with an ill-defined transformation that's the failure? You define it incorrectly, so you'll never achieve it. Is that more?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier, right? Digital transformation isn't a project, it's a process. So if you understand that it's a process, then it's never going to stop. So you can't measure whether it's a success or a failure. I think badly scoped projects that are probably too ambitious in the first place. It is the biggest problem. It's the reason why enterprise software has failed time and time again over the past 20 years, right? And it does. So, one of my former mentors used to have a saying. He'd say, the best way to eat an elephant is in lots of little sittings. Yes. Exactly the same for me with digital transformation. Pick the bit that you can do it well, move on, do another one. And
there's more of it. There's more of it to come. So there is no real, how long does a digital transformation take? If you're asking that question, you're asking the wrong question. Or if you have an answer to that question, you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's a polite way of what I was thinking. If you have an answer to that question, then you're possibly not being quite as truthful as you might want to be.
David, what would you recommend for our listeners? A few recommendations to think about regarding their digital transformations. Any one or two things come to mind?
Yeah, I think it's about balance as much as anything. We've talked about the fact that digital transformation isn't a project, that it's a process. We've talked about technology that can help you digitally transform, but technology isn't the driving force. The business should be the driving force. And I think the key thing really is exactly what you mentioned earlier. It's understanding that the biggest thing in this whole piece is the people. It's understanding how that technology can help those people either work remotely or do their job more efficiently or go home on a Friday evening and be with their kids. Something as fundamental as that. That for me is the biggest thing to take away. Technology isn't there as a master. It's there to be used to help the business.
That's some great words, some sage words. Final question, what do you think on this? Are we in general, so outside of work, just in our general lives, have we been on a personal digital transformation journey the last 10 years with the advent of, I won't say the internet's been around, but with the advent of online software, mobile communications and apps? Are we in the middle of just personal digital transformation as well as finding it in work? And should that give us some comfort?
Yeah, we are, absolutely. And it should give us as users comfort. I think it scares the pants off most IT departments because, quite frankly, the speed and pace of innovation and adoption and digital transformation that we've got in our personal lives is going way faster than the IT department can keep up. And you think back 10 years ago, business IT was driving the IT agenda. Everything that new went into the business first. It's completely on its head. Everything that's new now is going into consumer and individual tech, and then it flows through to the business. And I think that paradigm shift, if you want to call it that, has been really interesting. And it's the way that, you know, startup software companies can spin out viral software that takes them from nothing to stock market listings,
Yes.
or huge amounts of seed funding within months, which previously would have taken years, if not decades, to get to. So I think, yeah, absolutely, we have been on a digital transformation. I mean, look at your own personal technology stack, whether it's Galaxy or iPhone or whatever.
Yeah.
You'll buy into that and you'll connect the things and you'll
Yeah.
stream from your phone to your TV and do things that, you know, even 4 years ago were unthought of.
Even say today's session is brought to you not by an IT department, but by someone savvy enough to set up, and you know, and we can do this now. Music can be recorded on your phone these days. The record industry has been decimated in their old traditional way, but that's not bad because new models are coming out in new ways. Bad for the middle person in that sense, the record companies. But you know, they brought in technology. I always remember they brought in the CD technology to reduce their cost of production. They People will go, "What's a tape these days?" But for those that remember, they were a lot cheaper to make than tapes or vinyl in the past. But what quickly happened was they were easily copied. So, and then they were replaced with the Napsters and this, and then that led to Spotify, which then, and those types, which have now decimated their industry. But you got to innovate and innovate some way. You can't just control the market, which I think they did. I think that's a fantastic way to end, is thinking about our own personal transformation journeys and how we just adapt to it. But as you said, it's happening faster in the personal consumer market than it is now in the business market, which is a phenomenal change, you know, which I think is what we're stuck with. But David Jones, we're going to finish there, and I'm going to say, David Jones, thank you so much for joining us today on CCC Talks.
Mark, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. Had a great time.
Thank you, David.